We're talking today with Mr. Julius Masinick of Warren, Michigan. Julius, better known as Bud. Bud, can you start by telling us a little bit about yourself? To begin with, where and when were you born?
I was born February 5th, 1925, in a little town I don't even think it was incorporated at the time. I don't ever saw it on a map. It's called Mary D, Pennsylvania.
Mm-hmm.
M-A-R-Y, capital D.
And where in Pennsylvania?
That was eastern Pennsylvania, about the general area of a little west of Philadelphia, a little northwest of Reading.
Mm-hmm. And what did your family do for a living?
My dad was a coal miner, and in 1936, when John and Lewis got such a good contract for the coal miners, the country started switching to oil,
Mm-hmm.
and consequently, a lot of mines were closed, and consequently, my dad's job was closed.
And
So we moved to Detroit in 1936.
And did he find a job there?
Yes, and jobs were a little tough at the time, but my aunt was our connection in Detroit, knew the personnel manager of US Rubber, and they got him a job. So he went right to work, and at the time, I had about 5 brothers and
Mm-hmm.
a sister, and I'll tell you, it was nip and tuck all the way.
I can believe it. Now, let's see, did you finish high school?
Yes,
Okay.
1942.
And what high school did you attend?
Eastern High School. It's no longer built. I mean, they tore it down
Mhm.
after a while. But incidentally, we're having a reunion of the high school a couple of weekends from now
Mhm.
on a Sunday, and it's surprisingly the class of '42, which I graduated with. They still show up. But what has done, the fact that the school's no longer open, they have a new group of invitees of 50 years.
Mhm.
My first reunion there was after 50 years, and then we were invited back every year thereafter, which I'm going to again, which will be that's going to be my 66th reunion.
That's really something. All right. Now, as you while you were in high school, before Pearl Harbor, were you paying much attention to what was going on in the world? Did you know there was a war on in Europe and that kind of thing?
To an extent, because I was a history student, I liked history, and there's a connection with this Pearl Harbor thing. It was on a Sunday, it was warm. I say it was warm because people had their front doors open,
Mm-hmm.
and I was coming back from a bowling alley. We had a kids' bowling league in 1941. There weren't many kids' bowling leagues back then. And I got off the bus and was walking home from the corner, and I kept hearing this, Pearl Harbor was bombed. I had no conception of what Pearl Harbor was. And I got in and I asked my dad about it, and he told me all about what had happened, because it was just newly announced about that time, early afternoon.
Right.
And the next day, I was a senior in high school. I was only 16 years old. And the first thing our homeroom teacher told us, listen, you guys, don't be running down a recruiting station and signing up. When you graduate in June, it'll be soon enough. And of course, I, at the time, thought, 3 weeks, it'll be over. What am I going to worry about?
Right.
Never realizing that someday I'd be in the middle of that war.
Okay. Now then, once you did graduate, what did you do next?
I graduated in June of '42,
Mm-hmm.
and like I say, I wasn't 18 years old, so all the jobs in the city, or what they call this, something about construction or building or manufacturing for war. Detroit had a name for it. So I went out to Ford Motor Company, and they couldn't hire me because I wasn't 18 years old yet. They couldn't hire me to work in the plant, but they says, we got a job for you. And I got a job as a mail boy. And I was, excuse me, I was there about 2 months. And incidentally, all those male boys, with the exception of me, were on the job because their fathers had been killed in the factory, in the plant. And they gave these 16, 17-year-old kids jobs as mail boys to subsidize their family they'd lost their father at the time. Anyway, I was there about 2 months, and the guy who was a foreman of our group, he was drafted. And you got to think back, 1942, service, guys were being drafted.
Right.
He was drafted, and they had to get a new foreman. So they called me in because I was the only high school graduate in the bunch. They wanted me to be the foreman, and I was. I was a foreman until I went in the Navy.
Now, did you enlist in the Navy or were you drafted?
No, I was drafted. Listen, I was no gung-ho, rah, rah, rah. Listen, there's a war on there. I don't want to get shot at.
So you didn't need the teacher to tell you not to go run off to sign up?
No. I was enlisted for the draft in February of 42. April of 42, I was at Great Lakes Naval Training Station.
Was it 42 or 43? Because 43 is when you
42. 43, I'm
you turned
sorry.
18,
Yes.
43. Yeah.
43, I signed up for the draft, yes. And then I was drafted, and I was in the Navy 3 months later.
Now, do you know how you were assigned? Do they just need bodies in the Navy and you were the right number? Or?
I just was lucky. I preferred the Navy. I was glad they gave me the Navy, but I don't even know if we had a choice.
Yeah.
But I went in the Navy, and I was glad I did.
All right. Now, what was your reaction to Great Lakes when you got there? What did the place look like? What was that first experience there like?
It was strange, but realize that everyone's in the same boat. Everyone's a boot. We're greener in grass, and a lot of us have never been away from home before, and it was boot camp though. And you're one of 130 guys in the same company, and you frolicked, and you 18-year-old kids, they play around a lot. We have a lot of fun.
Was there a lot of emphasis on discipline and drill and turning you into military people, or not so much of that?
Oh yes, there was definitely, except I got excused. Your third week of boot camp is what they call your work week. In other words, they want a bunch of mess cooks because, you're feeding all those different companies coming through. They had to have people working in the chow halls.
Sure.
And everyone became a mess cook, except me. I could type. They sent me up to the hostess house, and I worked for a group of ladies who were civilian volunteers, and they took care of all the visitors coming into Great Lakes at this hostess house. The recruit would come up from his barracks, and the visitors would come up from the main gate. On weekends now it was kind of open house, but during the week, perchance there'd be a soldier stop in. His brother was in camp. So what would amount to be, I'd go get the soldier at the gate, bring him to the hostess house, call the barracks where this brother was staying, and I'd have him come to the hostess house, and they'd visit. And I was there. It was like I started Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. I worked for a lady. Her name was Kathleen Lord, nice old lady. And she said to me, she says, "How would you like to spend the rest of your boot camp here?" How can you do that? I says, "I'd love it. I'd have out there missing all that drilling and everything." So I said, "I'd love it. Well, how can you do that?" She says, "Well, Admiral King, who incidentally was head of the Naval Training Station."
Well, there was not the Admiral King was head of the Navy then.
No, he was head of the Great Lakes Naval Training Station. Maybe he was head of the Navy later.
Yeah. Well, Admiral Ernest King was sort of the top man. He was the top man in the Navy out in Washington. But there could be more than one Admiral King. Anyway.
Well, this guy was top man at Great Lakes. She said to me, "Well, Admiral King is having dinner at my house Sunday." Pardon me. Okay.
Yeah.
So Monday morning, my chief, my boot camp chief was a guy by the name of Russ Letlow. If you're a football fan, he was all pro guard with Green Bay before and after the war.
Wow.
And he called me into his office. He says, "Jughead," he said, talk to him. "Jughead, what'd you do now?" I said, what do you mean? He said, "I got these papers saying that you're supposed to report to the hostess house every day from now till the completion of your boot camp, and all you have to do is your musts, like gas mask drill, rifle range, stuff like that. But you don't have to get out on the drill field and the grinder and march. And I said, thank you. But that's where I spent the rest of my boot camp. But it was strange. I met two people of renown there. One was Mickey Cochran, who was manager of the Detroit Tigers before the war, and he was a lieutenant commander. And he was in charge of the Great Lakes baseball team, who had a lot of professional baseball players on it. Well, our initial connection was, excuse me, he talked to me and he found out I was from Detroit and all that, and it was great. And I says, "Can you get me a baseball bat?" And he got a chit out, and he's right on it. He signed his name. He says, "Take this over to Main Side." The Main Side was like going to the Taj Mahal back then. It was, the boots didn't get to the Main Side. That was ship's company stayed there, and that was like the upper echelon of our little Navy. He said, "Go over to Main Side, the athletic office over there, and see the chief there, and he'll take care of you." So I walk in there, and the chief takes me over to this bat room. Well, I've been in Griswold Sporting Goods in Detroit where they had bats for sale, just racks them. This had more bats in it than they had in a sporting goods store. So he says, "Help yourself." So I go over there and I'm feeling these bats. Boy, incidentally, I played American Legion baseball. We were the state champs the previous year. So I was a baseball player. So I'm feeling these bats, and I'm laying this one over. He says, I says, "How many can I have?" He says, "It doesn't say here, it says bats." I walked out of there with 6 professional baseball bats, Louisville Sluggers, boy. And I took them back to the guys in the barracks because we used to play every night, and we'd broken our only bat. And I says, "Hey guys, help yourself." They couldn't believe it. But anyway, that was Mickey Cochran. Then he invited me to come out and work out with our ball club. So I'm over there with all the major leaguers: Barney McCoskey, John Mize, Jim Tabor, Joe Grace, all of them, Schoolboy Rowe. I was with all the frontline guys, big leaguers. And then there was another guy at this hostess house, was frequented quite a bit. His name was Father Strange. He was a Catholic chaplain. He was a lieutenant. And he said to me one day, he says, "Son, I don't know how you're going to fight the war. What are you learning here with these old ladies?" End of first patrol run on the Icefish. We had a pretty good run, successful run. We come into the Majuro Atoll, which is down in the Marshalls, and when you come back from a patrol run, it's usually the same. All the local admirals are there. They're bringing all the ice cream aboard, milk, oranges, and also in tow with the admirals is a chaplain. You guessed it. Coming down the gangplank, here comes Father Strange. And he looked at me and he said, "I don't believe it. I don't believe it." But anyway, that was my connection with the hostess house. From there I went to service school and then to submarine school.
Now, where was service school?
In Great Lakes.
Still at Great Lakes, okay. And then what were you doing at that level?
In submarine school?
Well,
in
service school. Yeah.
I was going to yeoman school. They were teaching me how to read and write.
Okay.
No, really. Anyway, they gave you aptitude tests prior, and I could type and I could write shorthand.
Right.
And so, hey, I don't know what a yeoman is, but that sounds pretty good. I'll do that. And So I went to yeoman school for 16 weeks. And thereafter, I went to submarine school. And you say, how long did I think about submarine school? I never thought about it. I just happened to be up in the front of the room sharpening a pencil or something, and the instructor said, here's a slip up here, and you guys want to sign up for submarine service, first 5 guys can have it. I'm standing right there, and I never get a thought. A minute before, I signed my name.
Now, if you hadn't sort of gone and done that, do you think you would have been sent just to a naval base someplace to kind of just keep track of records or put on a ship?
I would have, they might have sent me anywhere, you know, aboard ship. I knew a guy, he was from Grosse Pointe, a guy by the name of Jack McCarthy. He ended up, the reason I met him, he'd been on the Sawfish, which is a submarine, prior to the Icefish. In fact, they were coming, he did 6 patrol runs on the Sawfish, coming back to the States as Icefish was going out to the South Pacific. And I used to always tell him, Jack, we covered the war. You did 6 on the Sawfish, I did 5 on the Icefish. But he went to yeoman school, and he was in the service before me, of course. He was older. He went to yeoman school in Toledo, and he was assigned to Brooklyn Navy Yard after yeoman school. And he said, I had a ball. He said, I'd go to downtown New York at the USO and get tickets to all the shows and all the ball games. And he said, but then I got to thinking, what am I going to tell my grandkids after the war? You know, what'd you do in the war, Grandpa? So he says, I decided to volunteer for submarine duty. And that's how he was in submarines.
So for you, it just kind of came up. Well, while you were in service school back at Great Lakes, I mean, did you have more, you had liberty to kind of go into Chicago and do things there, or did you just kind of stay on the base?
We had liberty every weekend. We'd go into Chicago. We only had 32 hours. A lot of times I'd jump a train and come into Detroit and then stay till Sunday evening after dinner, and I'd run down to Michigan Central and catch a train back to Great Lakes. I was only not even 2 days, and but it was, you know, it was home. It was,
right.
Yes, it was something.
That was something. All right. Now, where did they do submarine school?
New London, Connecticut.
Okay. Electric Boat Shipyard is still there, I guess.
Yes, it's Groton. Yes.
Groton, yeah, cut there. All right. Now, how do they run the submarine school? I mean, what happens to you once you get there? What do you do?
Well, they put you in the barracks, and there's a guy there, a taskmaster. His name was Spritz. He was in charge of all the new entries into submarine school, and he never went ashore. The legend about him, he never drank, he never smoked, and he was strictly Navy. And they say he swore that when a guy leaves that base as a submarine sailor, he's going to be 100%. And he was very, very good with what he did, but nobody liked him. He never went ashore. He probably was afraid somebody was going to bat him. But that was Spritz's Navy, what they call Spritz's Navy. And then he run you through, there's probably a whole week of it of testing, all kinds of tests. From seeing if you're nuts or if you're sexually proper and all that stuff. I remember going to the psychiatrist, and I walked in there, and he says, I hardly sat down, he says, do you have a girlfriend? I said, let's see, I got about 8 of them married. He said, get out of here. that was my test with the psychiatrist. But it was very good. A lot of things they gave you were see if you were mechanically adept, you know, things with your hands, and reflection from your, you know, eyes to your brains to your hands, you know, and there was a lot of tests that they make sure you were, because they flunked out a lot of guys. I mean, the average was big. From their origin, when you first signed up to go to submarine school, indicate that you wanted to be there, to the time you finally were accepted, the percentage was, 1 out of 30, if
Mhm.
it was that good.
And do they do things like they put you in enclosed spaces and see if you'd go crazy or anything like that?
Well, they did not really that much. Of course, with me, I'm 18 years old. I'm full of spunk, you know, and
Mhm.
I'm sure they didn't waste as much time with me as they did some of the older guys.
Mhm.
They just saw I was kind of spunky kid, and uh, they let it go at that. But you do get tests, like they put you in a pressure tank and they build up the
Mhm.
pressure.
Mhm.
That's so to see if you can stand any pressure,
Right.
because a lot of that stuff, those tests, for instance, had to do with escaping
Right.
a submarine.
Right.
Where when you escape from a submarine with what they called the Munson lung, which was an apparatus you uh, filled it full of air, and then if you were relieving the submarine uh, in an escape, you used this lung, and it was one thing that supplied air, and it was also buoyant to
Mhm.
take it to the surface. But anyway, they taught you how to do that, and they put you in this pressure tank, and they keep building up the pressure and see if you get. Usually, most guys can handle it. You know,
Mhm.
you pop your ears a few times, and
Mhm.
first it hurts, and then you finally pop your ears, and then you're with it. You know,
Mhm.
but that we did that. Then we had the test for where you escape through the hatch. We went up 100 yards,
Mhm.
100 feet to the surface, and there were a lot of aptitude tests and that, but they weren't tough. They
Mhm.
weren't tough, and they always say about how smart you had to be to get the submarine service. Well, you don't have to be that smart.
All right. Now, how long did the testing part go on? I mean, how much of that was there?
About a week,
Mhm.
different phases of it.
And at that point, and when do you actually go on to a submarine?
That's an experience. You start school, and it just happened that it was in December I started submarine
Mhm.
school. And you're in submarine school, and after you're there a few days, they say, "Well, tomorrow morning we're going out to sea on a boat, on a submarine." Well, what they were using at the time were old submarines. I mean,
Mhm.
old submarines. Like the first submarine I went on was designated the '06.
Mhm.
There was old class boats. They were built in
1920 or
about
something?
'06.
Oh.
I mean, they were old.
Yep.
And it was so strange. They give you a jacket because it's to go out to sea, and you
Mhm.
don't wear a pea coat, and it's warm, and December in New London it's kind of cold. And they told me that you were going to handle the number 4 line, which means when you leave the pier, you throw the line off.
Right.
Well, okay. Now it's dark and it's cold, and they've got the engines running on the
Mhm.
'06, and I walk back there, and it gets pretty narrow, which I didn't know about, and I end up slipping over the side, hanging onto the cleat, and yelling like heck, and nobody can hear me because the engines are running. I could have drowned there, and nobody would have known it.
Mhm.
But I climbed back up, and I came up forward and didn't say much to anybody about it,
Mhm.
and that was it.
So
But
you
that was
hang.
my first inclination if we are going to like submarines or not.
All right. Were you hanging above the water line at least when you fell over? Or did you go
Oh,
in the
no,
water?
I didn't get wet.
Okay.
No, I was
Yeah.
just hanging onto this cleat.
So they couldn't tell anything had happened to you necessarily.
If I had have fallen in, they'd never known it,
Mhm.
except when I was missing for something.
Right. All right. Well, so what was that first trip out there like?
Oh, we went out for a ride. What it was, they showed us a few things. How you vent and blow tanks, and bow and stern planes operation. It's basics.
But they did submerge. That you weren't
Yes,
just cruising on
yeah.
the surface.
Yeah, we made a few dives in it, but it was an old submarine.
Mhm.
I mean, then it was very oh basic. I mean, a lot of stuff was operated by hand, like opening, shutting the vents. There was no
Mhm.
hydraulic assistance or anything. It was by hand, manually,
Mhm.
period.
All right. Now, then, did they then take you out on longer trips and things
Well,
like that?
yeah,
or-
we'd go out occasionally on boats, and we were mostly rowed on the old boats. Now, there was a later class, just a few years later, was in our class. That was one step up.
Mhm.
And then I went out one day on an S boat, what they call it. Now you're getting into more modern submarines. In
Mhm.
fact, there were some S boats that actually made patrol runs in World War II.
Now, the boats tended to have names, and a lot of them might have the same first letter. Was that tied into the classes?
Well,
or
there
it
was a
separate?
class, yeah, like there was old boats,
Mhm.
and then there were our boats.
Right.
Then the S boats followed, and then the fleet type boats came, the Gato classes and
Mhm.
Baleos,
Mhm.
and those were all what they call fleet type. They were all
Right.
311 feet long, 311 feet 9 inches, and 27 feet 3 inches wide. You had it all there, you know.
Mhm.
And we had probably 250 to 300 of those out in the fleet after
Mhm.
the war got underway.
All right. Now, if you're on an S boat or a fleet boat as opposed to one of those O class ones, how is that different? I mean, what's aside from just being bigger?
Just advancements in progress in construction and everything else in operation. Yes, the fleet type boats were bigger. The S boats were, I don't know the exact dimensions, but I'm sure they were 50 to 75 feet shorter.
Mhm. All right.
They were looked more like a German U-boat in size. Well, most of the German U-boats that they used in the Atlantic were smaller
Mhm.
craft.
Right. Now, how did you adjust to being underwater? Did you notice it much at all, or just no
No.
big deal?
No. In fact, that's why they have 18-year-old kids doing that.
Mhm.
Piece of cake.
Were there people going out on these training voyages who did have trouble with it, or didn't like it, or wanted to get out?
Oh, yes. I mean, every once in a while, we had a chief go haywire, and of course, it was the end of his submarine career.
Mhm.
And we had one patrol, had a seaman aboard, and when you hear a depth charge, a submarine 50 miles away could be in depth charge,
Mhm.
and you could hear the reports, the concussions from where you are. Well, there was some far-reaching depth charges that we could hear aboard, and this one new seaman we had aboard, he went running back to his bunk. He pulled the blankets over his head and laid in there like a little
Mhm.
baby. And of course, that was his last patrol.
Right. Okay. Now, how long do they have you in submarine school?
Submarine school was only 6 or 7 weeks.
Mhm.
Then I went down to Key West for a month, and we did practice on sound equipment, which it was a big thing with submarines.
Mhm.
So we were on this R boat, and then
Now, at this point, did you have a particular specialization as a submarine crewman, or were you just going to be somebody?
I was a yeoman.
Okay.
In fact, I wasn't even the boss yeoman. I was
Mhm.
this what they call a striker. However, that was just your rate.
Mhm.
But the operation of the submarine your rate didn't have much to do with it,
Mhm.
except your ability, your size, and I mean, I did a lot of things aboard. I stood lookout watches,
Mhm.
and I stood watches on the helm, and the bow planes and the stern planes, and these are kind of coincidental with being a lookout. Like
Mhm.
if you submerge, you clear the bridge, you're down,
Mhm.
and now you got a station in the control room.
right.
You're on the bow planes or the stern planes or
Mhm.
maybe the helm.
Mhm.
And I also, getting into the war part of it, we first went commission, I was the first loader on a 5-inch gun.
Mhm.
And then we were back after our second patrol run. They put 2 new 40mm guns aboard, and I became the gun captain on the forward 40. That was good, because I was up there just in front of the bridge where the
Mhm.
captain and the diving officer stood, and any kind of if I was up there for battle surface, I could hear what what they're talking
Mhm.
about, you know. So I was right in there on it. And I was a swimmer when we were got into this thing of picking up aviators.
Mhm.
Uh, I was the guy who had to go out and tie the rope onto the life rafts and pull them in, you know.
So you're kind of doing a whole string of things whenever needs to get done in the subs, and they have guys like you who kind of rotate through on the different watches, and do
These
those
jobs
things.
were all volunteer, these
Mhm.
extracurricular activities. You didn't have to do those things.
Yeah.
And then toward the end of the war, the Japanese were sending their officials from the islands, the outlying islands, Japan, uh, back to the mainland. They didn't want to put them on big ships because they
Mhm.
were getting torpedoed.
Right.
They sent them back in small craft, like 40-foot motorboats, like you
Mhm.
see in the Lake St.
Sure.
Clair, you know. And they were sending them back to Japan and those things, and we were told to accost them, which was kind of fun. But the thing about it is, the fun part was me. I was the first one over. We throw the
Oh.
grappling hook over, and I was the next guy over. And it was, we actually picked up a couple of Japanese guys.
And did you scare
one time-
fishermen?
Pardon?
Did you scare local fishermen and things too?
You mentioned that. We pulled alongside of a junk, and it turned out it was a Chinese junk.
Mhm.
And it was sad. It was a family, and they had very little aboard, you know. They had some bags of fish there. I cut a hole in them,
Mhm.
and geez, the bugs start coming
Mhm.
out. And anyway, it was sad that we couldn't get out of there fast enough. And what happened? They had, instead of the runner being in the middle of the tail,
Mhm.
they had it on the side,
Mhm.
and we had tied this thing up alongside, and this rudder hit against our steel hull and it
Just snapped
fell
off.
off.
Oh.
Now I could just see, we gave them a couple loaves of bread and we took off. I could just see this junk out in the middle of the ocean going in circles after we departed. I still remember that.
All right. Let's say to back up, so you were back at Key West. I know you were testing sonar equipment, learning to use
Yeah,
that?
we're
or-
learning to run sonar equipment.
All right.
Oh, that was another thing. I'm down at Key West, and we're out on we used to go out on R11. It was an R boat every day, and they'd drop us off at the pier, and then we'd catch a bus, go back to our barracks. And I was going back one of the first few days out, and I saw a baseball team practicing. Driver, let me off here. I'll walk the rest of the way. I went over, and what it was a bunch of Marines.
Mm-hmm.
They had a battalion team. They lived underneath the stand. They had a regular barracks
Mhm.
set up underneath there, and all they did was play baseball and take care of that baseball diamond.
Mm-hmm.
They were the maintenance and the ground crew and everything else. So I went to them and I asked one of the guys, I says, can I work out with you guys? Well, in baseball, you always use an extra shagger,
Mhm.
you know,
Right.
a guy to chase the baseball.
Mhm.
Oh yeah, sure, come on out. So out we go, and I worked out with them every day. This was in March of '44.
Mm-hmm.
So about the first part of April, the Icefish crew is starting to build, and we're in what they call the new construction barracks in
Mhm.
New London. And we're getting the crew together, assembling and going through some workout drills. And outside this barracks I was staying in, there was a baseball diamond. And there was a whole bunch of guys, looked like they were trying out for a baseball team. Well, you know how guys are.
Mhm.
Hey, they said to me, hey, big leaguer, why don't you go out there and try out? Show us what kind of a ball player you are. I said,
Mhm.
come on, let's go, I'll show you. So I go out there, take my baseball gloves, I was first baseman then. And I walked up to this lieutenant who was running the team, and it turns out it was Jimmy Gleason, who played second base for the Chicago Cubs
Mhm.
before the war. I walked up to him and I says, he's an 18-year-old punk.
Mhm.
Who's running this ball club? Oh, he looked at me. I guess I am. I says, how about a tryout? Well, he was gonna slough me off. He says, okay. And he says, you get 3 swings, there's 2 guys right there, you get in front of them. You bat in front of there, take your turn first. And so I get in the batter's box there, and I hit 3 right on the nose. Bang, bang. He came over to me, he says, wait a minute. What position do you play? I said, I'm first baseman. Go out there and work out. Well, I was one of the fancy Dan kids, whirl, throw, pivot, you know.
Yeah.
And then he came running out. He says, you sure you want to play ball with us? I said, sure. He says, you're my first baseman. So I made the team inside of a half hour.
There you go.
And I'm looking at my guys. And so the season started, the actual season started. And played a couple ball games, and I'm doing good. Gleason liked me. You young punk. And so all at once, the Icefish crew's got to report to Manitowoc. The Icefish was being built in Manitowoc, Wisconsin. The crew's assembled. We're going to go up to Manitowoc, and it's going to be commissioned in June. So we're going to be up there for the commissioning. So we went up there, and but before I left, I went and saw Gleason. I said, Skip, time to go. He said, what do you mean? I says, the Icefish crew calls. I'm leaving. I've got to leave to go to Manitowoc to join the crew. He says, wait a minute. He says, I can keep you here the rest of the war. Don't go. Me, no, I'm sorry, Skip. Gotta go, fight the war. You know, I had all that training and that, I better go. I can't believe I did that.
Yeah, who knows what your career would have been otherwise.
Now I would say, I'm staying. Anyway, that's up to Manitowoc, put the boat in commission, took it down to Mississippi and put on some live torpedoes down in Algiers. It was outside New Orleans there.
And what's the trip down the Mississippi like in a submarine?
It was nothing. You got to you went down the Great Lakes, you got into the Chicago drainage canal, and they loaded you on a floating dry dock. You didn't maneuver that thing down to Mississippi. You loaded on a floating dry dock, and you went down to Mississippi. A third of the crew only was aboard. 2/3 they sent home on leave.
Right.
But I was one of the guys who went down, and at the time I thought, I don't know how to do this, but I'm glad I did. It was quite an experience. Got down in New Orleans and Algiers down there. And we were there a few days, loaded on some live torpedoes, and off we go. That was really something. You know, at the time, all this training I'd been to, I had one dream on the train going from Detroit to Great Lakes. I had a dream on the train. And the dream in essence said, this is nothing. Or you haven't seen anything yet. That was my first inkling. And then the next feeling was when we were leaving New Orleans, going down to the Caribbean, down to the Panama, I was standing up on lookout. And I had this feeling, this is it, boy. This is it. And the worst part about it is, we're down in the Caribbean, heading down the Panama Canal, and I see a torpedo. Holy smokes, we got out of it.
Was it floating or was
It was after, it was coming, it just missed us, I guess.
like a U-boat looking for you or something?
Yeah, pardon?
Like a German U-boat?
Yes. Yes, but anyway, we didn't get hit by the torpedo, but we dove and got the heck out of there. But it was scary. It was very scary.
All right. And so then what did you see when you got to the Panama Canal?
We went through we did some trials out of Panama, because you remember this is the first time we were in salt water. And we had to just recalibrate all the gauges and everything to adjust to salt water, and which we did. We did a lot of training, a lot of drilling, a lot of dives, because we were a new crew, and we had to kind of get together and coordinate as a team. And we after we went through the canal, And on our way to Pearl Harbor, it was the same thing. We just drilled and drilled and drilled
Mhm.
because you had to get it ready. And our skipper was very tough about being right there when it came to training. We could clear the bridge in 29 seconds. And that's almost a record in submarines.
Now, were the skipper or any of the officers or seamen, were these people who had been out on submarines before
Oh,
the war?
yes, now, our skipper is a guy by the name of Richard Peterson. He had, he was skipper of I think the Seahorse. And our exec had previous experience. He later became a skipper after, he made one run on the Icefish, and then he got his own command. A guy by the name of Walter Small. And some of the other, let's see now. There was we had a Mustang aboard. Mustang is a guy came from the enlisted ranks. They made him an officer. A guy by the name of Clark, Sam Clark. He had made runs previously on a submarine. And of course we had members of the crew, enlisted men had experience on patrol runs on submarines. Good thing, I mean, there's a lot of things you learn that you don't realize you've learned. Sure, you get all this stuff at submarine school, but until you get into actual combat, it's a different story.
And it's good to have some guys around who know what they're doing.
That's right.
And
kind of, you know, you always had an older guy as kind of your mentor, you know, and they kind of, you know, they're a little bit maybe arrogant, you might call it, but they're, you know, we've been here before, in other words.
All right. So about how long do you think it took to get from Panama Canal over to Hawaii? How long a cruise was that?
It took us a little longer because we did so many
Diving
drills
stuff,
on
yeah.
the way over. I think it was maybe 8 or 9 days.
Now, once you make it to Hawaii, do you get to put in at Pearl Harbor and stay for a while, or do you keep on going?
We pull into Pearl Harbor. We did some drills around Pearl Harbor. We were only there a few days, which is a kind of a sad story in my life. We pulled into Pearl Harbor, and there was a sailor, a kid I knew. He was from Ohio, but he was, when I was in yeoman school, he was in quartermaster school, and we shared the same barracks. They lived on one side, we lived on the other. And his name was Bill Buckholz. I'll never forget him, because he came down to the boat and he said, "Oh, look at you, bud, you got a boat, you know, you're a big hero, you know, you got a boat." It was kind of nice to get a new construction submarine out of submarine school like that. That was a kind of a good thing. And he said, "Listen, you got a boat." And 2 days later, he came down to see me. He says, "You know what? I got assigned to the Shark." It was a Shark 2. And, you know, the Shark 2 went down. In fact, we were on station with them down in Lady Straits. And we heard this incessant pounding of depth charges. And here, it was a Shark 2 that never surfaced that night. And here, all I could think of was Bucky. Gee.
Well, the submarine service was a pretty dangerous place to be.
1 out of 5.
Yeah.
1 out of 5 never came back.
Yeah, and among the ones who were going out there first, the numbers were probably higher than that, because we kind of lost.
Oh, yes.
It was a little bit safer at the end of the war than it was maybe early on.
Yes, I think experience and better torpedoes made it a better fight.
I think the Japanese were about the only ones who had torpedoes that worked at the beginning of the war, because even the German U-boats had stuff that malfunctioned.
Oh, the Germans, what they did, they had so many submarines, because Admiral Danitz and Hitler thought they were going to win the war with submarines, and they could have been right, except they, in opposition or comparison to our submarines, we were trained. We had men that were trained and qualified. We had proper, or better, let's maybe, might want to say, better equipment, better facility as far as food and bunks and that. But, you know, you go aboard You used to go aboard some of those German submarines, they didn't have a place to sleep, you
Mhm.
slept on the floor.
Right.
They used to wear leather clothes because of the oil absorption. And leather was easy. In fact, we were in Los Angeles a year and a half or so ago, and there's a Russian submarine tied up next to I think it's a Queen Mary or
Mhm.
go out there in LA. And I went aboard that submarine, the Russian submarine built in 1972.
Mm-hmm.
My goodness. It wasn't as modern as our old S-boats. And remember I told you the
Mhm.
S-boats were built before 1940,
Right.
1930s. They had no facilities for eating
Mm-hmm.
as far as like cruise quarters and
Right,
cruise
right.
mess on our submarine. You could seat 24 guys there at one time for a feeding. The Russian submarine, if they had one table, I'd be surprised. They had trays that would pull out of the side of the bulkhead, and you'd stand up and
Mhm.
eat. There were no bunks. There were no sleeping bunks that I saw. This was built in 1972. It had and it wasn't Nuki.
Mhm.
It was a
Diesel?
diesel boat, 3 diesel engines, and they had a lot of hydrogen absorbers or something into the overhead, and you could not stand up anywhere. You were bent over every time, all you walking through all the compartments.
Mhm.
I can't believe. And the German submarines were hardly country club
Nope.
places.
Nope.
And I remember the British submarines, they were filthy. I mean, we were pulling into Subic Bay one time, and there was a British submarine anchored out. We were about a
Mhm.
mile away. We could smell it already. And I don't mean just diesel oil.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. Now you're in Pearl Harbor, and they send you out pretty quickly. Where are you going at that point when you leave Pearl Harbor?
At Pearl, we got our first assignment, our
Mhm.
first patrol.
Yeah.
Lady Straits. Straits of Lady. October, we're down there in October, November of '44.
So that's right at kind of around the time of the landing and the naval battles and a lot of that kind of
Yeah.
stuff going on.
That was big down there then.
Mhm.
In fact, we lost 3 submarines on the 24th of October. The Tang, the Darter, and the Shark,
Mm-hmm.
24th. And
Now,
it was-
what was your boat doing when it gets out to the Philippines? I mean, what's your assignment, or
well,
are you
what
doing?
happened at that assignment? You mentioned that was good. You mentioned assignments. There was naval intelligence had discovered that there was a 50-ship convoy leaving Japan,
Mm-hmm.
and we had submarines lined up. By the time they got to us, there was 13 ships left.
Wow.
We got on the 23rd or 24th, we got a freighter, and 2 days later, we got a troop transport. That was when we almost got ours.
Mm-hmm.
We got depth charged viciously. I mean, evidently there was 3 escorts with this troop transport, and their charge was gone. They had no one to protect, so
Mhm.
they were after us.
They were just sub-hunting at that
Oh,
point.
they beat us unmercifully. We really got the heck knocked out of us.
All right. Now, if you know that you're under attack or their escorts may be coming after you, what does a submarine do at that point? What's the best or safest
First thing you
to-
do, you dive.
Mhm.
And we dove to 300 feet, and Rickford depth charge at silent running, which means everything is shut off.
Mhm.
There's not a motor running. You don't talk if you can help it. You got propulsion of maybe 2 knots with on the battery. You know,
Mhm.
there's nothing there. Even the fans are turned off.
Right.
We leveled off at 300. Then we got it. We got 13 depth charges stern to stem.
Mm-hmm.
13, bang, 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 and we got driven down to 412 feet immediately.
Mm-hmm.
And we thought we were gone. Everything was leaking. All heck broke
Now,
loose.
when you go down that extra 100 feet, was that pressure from the charges, or did you just
We
go
were
down?
knocked down.
You were knocked down.
We were knocked
Okay.
down, yes.
So they were sort of
They
close
dropped
enough.
these depth charges right on our decks practically. And
So they're exploding above you, and
yes,
it's pushing you down,
the concussion drove us down.
but not close enough to actually.
Well, the thing is,
Break
I
the law.
understand, they had to get those depth charges to come underneath you to
Mhm.
drive you up, unless they exploded
Right.
you right there.
Right. So you kind of go to now. How, in principle, how deep could one of these subs go and not implode?
How deep?
Yeah.
I was down on the Icefish at 600 feet.
Mm-hmm.
It's constructed to go to 600 feet. Plus, there's a 150% safety thing on it.
Mhm.
In other words, actually, it could have went to 900 feet.
But you didn't push it that far.
Oh, no, we were set it.
Yeah.
That was the deepest we went with. It was 400
Did
feet.
going deeper do you any good in terms of evading sonar and detection? I mean, more water between you
Oh,
and
yes.
them?
Well, what you do, you get a lot of conditions, like there's, what do they call it? But the temperature of the water
Mhm,
changes,
mhm.
at different
Right.
levels, and you, it makes it difficult, just like when you're on the surface, you get, someone's after you, and you get a rain squall between
Mhm.
you and he,
Mhm.
and you're home free,
Right.
He can't find you now. And the same thing with gradients of water and that, it's change in temperatures, and there's evasive tactics to be taken,
Mhm.
That was another thing. They rigged for depth charge and silent running.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone goes to their stations. I just stood there. I didn't move. You know why? Next thing you heard was Masinick to the control room.
Mm-hmm. So what was Masinick supposed to do in the control room?
Remember I said rig for depth charge and silent running?
Mhm.
All motors are turned off.
Right.
The wheel has got to be turned by hand.
Okay.
Now you got the captain up there with using evasive tactics, which meant right full rudder, left full rudder, right full rudder, left full rudder, and come to course 180 and all this.
So it's like an extreme version of going from power steering to manual, where you've got to turn it and a
Manual,
lot and
everything,
fast.
right,
Yeah.
right. And that was it. There was 3 of us. And like I say, as soon as we went to silent running, I knew what it was.
Mm-hmm.
I'd be moving, and there were 3 of us up there like horses. We take turns turning that wheel.
What was the most damage you think the boat took in any one of these patrols?
Our boat,
Yeah.
other than a lot of leaks,
Mhm.
a lot of lines were burst, saltwater lines. Our whole hydraulic system was shot.
Mhm.
We lost so much hydraulic oil, we had to, after we got the lines all patched up and working again, we didn't have enough hydraulic oil, so we used a mixture of Mazola oil and fuel oil to use for this hydraulic oil.
Mhm.
And it worked.
All right. So you had sort of internal systems sort of breaking down and stuff, but not so much,
We didn't
hull
lose
breaking
any
down.
hull.
Yeah.
There were no concussions in the hull.
Right.
Except every time one of those depth charges hit, you figure, that wall's coming in.
Mhm.
That bulkhead's coming in. But we were very fortunate.
All right. Let's go turn it back around the other way. When you're out on patrol and you're looking for targets and so forth, what sort of standard operating procedure?
Well, you'd be on the surface. During the night, you'd be
Mhm.
on the surface. And of course, at dawn, you dive an
Mhm.
hour before daylight, and then you surface an hour after dusk, And nothing's happening. You're submerged during the day.
Mhm.
You're putting around in your patrol area.
Mhm.
Maybe you're going from 2 knots to 8 knots. 8 knots is that's fast.
Mhm. Now,
You're just kind of groping around, just waiting for a target.
Are you just under the surface so you can use a periscope, or are
We
you
use a
farther?
periscope, yeah,
Right.
most of the time.
And if you had a periscope up, did that also enable you to communicate by radio with other submarines? I mean, was there talk and traffic back and
There's
forth?
no such thing. When you're in an area, you don't transmit, period. Nothing.
Well, I asked that in part because in preparing for this interview, I kind of looked up the patrol logs for the submarine and so forth, and there's a fair amount of stuff about exchanges between
Oh,
submarines.
yes, now there are things like, they could even hook up those phones where they could converse.
Hmm.
But, certain area, you just, there's no transmission
Mhm.
because you didn't know, who was gonna pick it up.
Right.
Like, for instance, after we're in our second patrol run, and like I say, our hydraulic system in the first patrol, we just got beat to pulp. We get into the cold water of the Yellow Sea, which was where our second patrol
Mhm.
run, and our rudder the noise was unbelievable because of the setup with the hydraulic system, what had happened to it, and the cold water.
Mhm.
It just made that thing inoperable. It was too loud.
So was it still sort of suffering from the first round of repairs? You hadn't had that refitted properly?
Who knows? But it wasn't operable as far
Mhm.
as being with any kind of stealth situation. So now we're up in the Yellow Sea. We cannot transmit.
Mm-hmm.
So our captain took it upon himself to start heading for Pearl Harbor. No orders.
Right.
We got to the Bonin Islands. That's
That's where Iwo Jima is, yeah.
far east of
Mhm.
Japan.
Right.
And he transmitted, saying to ComSub back, told him the problem, I'm coming in. And they says, come on in. And I still remember that when we're in port, I was standing at brow watch, and the admirals were leaving, and they saying to the captain, it was okay, Pete, you did the right thing. And it was something. But yeah, we came back in.
Okay. Now, was the first patrol the one that sort of was maybe the most dangerous, or whether you kind of did
Oh,
the
by
most
far,
damage? Yeah.
by far. We never came close to a depth charging like that again. In fact, we never suffered. We had a few aerial bombs
Mhm.
thrown at us, but nothing like this barrage we got in that first war patrol.
And did you ever encounter sort of another convoy of any size, or were you now dealing with
No,
individual
that was the
ships?
biggest thing we ever saw.
Mhm.
I mean, that was the biggest thing we ever worked with at all. Shipping was to a minimum by the Japanese, and targets were few and far between for us.
Now, what other kinds of things could you do with a submarine? You mentioned, I think, you did rescue of downed aviators and things?
We picked up some aviators, yes. We down around Formosa.
And was that be something where you were actually, the boats were actually sent out with the idea to patrol certain areas because bombers are going through?
We got a call and saying that there was a B-25 went down, and
Mhm.
there were some aviators
Mhm.
felt that they were in our area somewhere, and we just looked for them. We found them.
All right.
They've been out there 24 hours.
Mhm. Now, what's going to enable you to spot a couple of guys floating in the middle of an ocean? I mean, must
Lookouts.
do just lookouts.
Yeah.
Do you just get to the point with some experience that you really can pick up a lot of things that maybe
Oh,
someone
yeah,
else wouldn't?
you're standing a lot of lookout watches like I
Mhm.
did, and there's not many things got by you,
Mhm.
There's, although, strange story. We were gonna go through the Lombok Straits on our way to Australia after our fourth patrol run. Northeast of Lombok Straits is the island of Bali. What do they have on Bali? They got a lot of girls running around in hula skirts and no
Mhm.
brassieres, right? Well, we're waiting to go through Lombok Straits. We're gonna go through at night, so we're out here in the surface in daylight, running around in big circles off the coast of Bali. Well, first thing you know, now the periscope is rigged. We're on the surface, but
Mhm.
the periscope is rigged for a bigger range.
Mhm.
We got 3 lookouts up there, plus a junior officer to deck and a senior officer to deck. And I was going up to relieve the starboard lookout. Starboard now.
Mhm.
Port lookout, port side was Bali.
Mhm.
I came up, relieved the guy, he went, and I looked over on the port side, naked eye, and I saw smoke on it supervise it.
Mm-hmm.
And I said to this guy, "You dumb SOB, can't you report that smoke?" I can't report it. I'm not even supposed to be looking
Mm-hmm.
over there. It turned out it was a Japanese minesweep.
Mm-hmm.
That's a pretty good target.
Mm-hmm.
So between the Icefish and the Baya, B-A-Y-A, and an Air Force plane, we sank the mine layer.
Mm-hmm.
But,
Well, they were busy scanning the shoreline for what they could see instead.
pardon me?
We're just looking at scanning the shoreline.
They were concentrating on Valley too much.
All right. Now, where else do you wind up putting in on the course of these tours? I mean, you're in the
After our first
Philippines.
patrol run, we were in Majuro, which is the Marshall.
Mm-hmm.
Second patrol run, Pearl Harbor. Third patrol run, Guam.
Mm-hmm.
Fourth patrol run, Australia. And the fifth patrol run home. We were submerged off Hong Kong when they told us that the war was over, and we scooted into Saipan, topped
Mm-hmm.
off fuel, into Pearl Harbor for another fuel topping in the day, San Francisco, Tiburon Bay in early September.
Mm-hmm. Let's see. Now, in Australia, did you get a Fremantle or somewhere else?
We're in Fremantle.
All right.
Fremantle, Perth, yes.
And what sort of place was that?
We stayed in the hotel. It was very nice. Perth was fun. It was, we had liberty every
Mm-hmm.
day, all day, and there was a few things, strange things.
We're just about out of tape here, so I'm going to stop this and think about being in
In
Australia.
Australia being a lot of fun. We stayed in a hotel there, and one night I was going out on a date with a little Aussie gal, and I was all cleaned up, and I'm coming down from the second floor, and I'm on the stairway, and I see 3 British sailors, limeys we call them,
Mm-hmm.
arguing with the desk clerk, an old guy that I had many conversations with because he was an old-time wrestler.
Mm-hmm.
And he was saying, "Mate, you can't go in there." What it was, at this place, this hotel, we had a lounge.
Mm-hmm.
And it was for American military personnel only.
Mm-hmm.
Well, all the pubs in Perth would close at 6 o'clock.
Mm-hmm.
This was after 6 o'clock, and these 3 sailors from Great Britain wanted a drink.
Mm-hmm.
And this old fellow was trying to keep them out. So I'm halfway down the stairs, and there was 2 signs there, said for American military personnel only. One was made of cardboard, the other was wood. Well, they got the cardboard sign, they tore it up, and they got the wooden sign, and they were jumping on it with their boots. About that time, I jumped over the banister and I decked one of them.
Mm-hmm.
Well, this was easy. All my guys are inside the lounge.
Mm-hmm.
And we ended up dumping three limeys into the ditch out in front of the hotel. So I had some blood on my skivvy shirt.
Mm-hmm.
So I went up real quick and I changed it and left for my date. And we're in the movies, and I could hear these sirens out there. I knew what they were.
Mm-hmm.
I suspicion. So I told her, I says, "Listen, anyone comes running at me, you just keep walking or step aside." Or we came out of the theater, and I couldn't understand it. It seemed that the street seemed so deserted.
Mm-hmm.
Except coming towards me, there was 2 British sailors, and I says, "Keep walking, Amy." And I didn't even ask any questions. I went up and hit the first one.
Mm-hmm.
And I threw the second one halfway down the block. And we took off, and I took her home and got back to the hotel, and my buddy said, "Nice going, boy."
Mm-hmm.
What's the matter? Well, it turned out there became a riot.
Oh.
All the British sailors were coming after the American sailors. The New Zealanders sided up with the Americans.
Mm-hmm.
I forget who the side the Dutch were on. Anyway, there was one big Donnybrook. All those sirens I heard were paddy wagons taking guys into the
Mm-hmm.
local jail, And they said, "Nice going, buddy boy." I said, I wasn't even here. But that was in Australia. Australia was fun. They treated us real nice down there. And to this day, they still honor American submarine sailors in Australia.
I do. Now, are there other particular incidents from the war patrols themselves that kind of stand out in your minds, kind of thing you haven't mentioned here, but that tend to come back to your head?
We didn't have any, other than that real huge depth discharge attack. We had a little incident off the coast of Java, Java, not to be confused with Japanese, but there was 3 Javanese fishing boats out there, probably maybe a mile offshore somewhere, and everything's under suspicion in the war. So the captains, we call for battle station surface. So I went up to my station on the 40 millimeter, and like I say, I was right near the bridge, and the captain's standing there, and he, like I say, it's about 2 or 3 in the morning, and it's very still out there. He says, kick one round out, just one round out to wake him up. He says, give him a lot of room, come forward of him. So we kicked one shell out, and boom. And there's a guy on a 20 millimeter on the main deck. For some reason, he opened fire, and we're shooting at these 3 fishing boats. They were beautiful. They were Javanese. They had decorated sails, wood carved prows. I mean, they were something to behold. Anyway, he opened fire on them, and you could see the sails going down. And the captain said to me, everyone cleared the bridge, and he says, sink them. So we sank 3 Japanese fishing boats. But it was kind of sad. But they, we left them, they would have went back and reported it to somebody.
Now, did you ever encounter any or capture any Japanese sailors or people of any
Yes,
boats?
we did have this one boat. We brought 2 Japanese aboard, and they had a couple crewmen. They were Malaccan kids that were their crew, and it was funny. This one Japanese captain wanted to interrogate him. So he told, like I say, I was an underling in the yeoman group, and he told yeoman he wanted them to take notes of this interrogation, and Smith said to him, Smith was the yeoman, and he says, well, Masinick will do it because he can write shorthand. So the captain, and that was another thing. There were a lot of first-class yeomen in the Navy that couldn't write shorthand, so they couldn't make chief. That was one of the prerequisites of becoming chief. Anyway, I go into the wardroom with the captain, and there's this Japanese guy sitting there, and the captain gets his Pidgin English book out, and he looks at this Japanese guy, and he says, Pidgin English. And this Japanese guy looked at him, he says, can't you speak English? And we learned in a little while that this Japanese man taught English in a girls' school in Japan before the war. Anyway, we interrogated him, and I'm writing all this shorthand stuff, and then I went into the yeoman shack after, and I transcribed the whole thing in about 5 pages. And I took it into the captain. He looked at it, and he was amazed. He said, I'll make you chief tomorrow. I said, oh, that's all the day's work. That's all right.
Now, what did this Japanese fellow look like?
Pardon?
What did the Japanese fellow look like? I mean, how old did he seem to be, that kind of thing?
He looked about 45.
What was he doing on the ship?
Well, he was on they were sending him back to Japan. Like I said earlier, all the officials, they were sneaking back to Japan on small craft. And it was just a little 35-foot runabout. Right. But I bet you he wondered what I was doing. First, I drag him off that boat. Then I'm in there listening to his testimony. What is this guy?
Yeah, it would be kind of an odd combination of things.
Well, the yeomen they used to call them ball bearing waves and that, you know. Well, you know, I didn't. I was a boxer in the war in the Navy.
Mm-hmm.
I all the time in service school I boxed. I boxed on the islands, and I never when I got made third class, you know, they put feathers,
Mm-hmm.
you know, I never even wore third class stripes because every time I went ashore, somebody wanted to fight,
Mm-hmm.
and I used to get in too many fights as it was, and and I used to have guys go ashore with me just to start a fight, so I'd fight. I fought a lot. I fought too much.
Well, your face doesn't look too bad for whatever you might have encountered along the way.
But like I said, I never wore third class stripes because it was a fight. You know, you just asking for a fight. You gotta, they start calling you a ball bearing wave and all that. Hey, how much of that can I take? In fact, you know, I trained at Great Lakes when I was in service school to get out of monkey drills, you know, exercise.
Right.
There was this chief said, if you'd like to get out of these things, see me after, and I'll talk to you about my boxing program. Well, it turns out this guy's name was Chief Rush, and he had a smoker, you know, in the Navy of fight card is called a smoker. Every Friday night they had 10 fights, and so I went to see him, and he says, well, you box in my program, you don't have to come to monkey drills. After the fights, we have all the milk you want to drink and all the steak you wanted to eat, which we didn't get a lot of in boot camp or service school.
Right.
And he says, you train on your own. You don't have to come to these exercise things anymore, but you train on your own. And so I did, but there was a guy I trained and worked out with. Boy, he was tough. He was in signalman school. Him and I, we sparred every day. We trained together. And he fought. And we used to line up for chow. You know, we'd walk in line, in ranks to the mess hall. And this one morning, it wasn't one of my better mornings, I hear some other group across the little ways there to the next mess hall. Oh, sweethearts, how are you today? You know, it was a yeoman class. And I said, nah, this is not the right day. So I walked over there. I says, which one of you guys wants to meet a sweetheart? And my buddy who I trained with just happened to be in that section. He says, I told you guys to shut up. He said, but I'll take care of it. He said, don't. But anyway, I boxed at Great Lakes. And it was so funny. I get in there, the first night I'm assigned to fight. They give me a robe, a towel, boxing shoes, socks, a cup, all this gear, you know. And I don't know anybody in there. And I go over to the locker and I'm fighting the sixth fight. And these two little redhead guys come over and they say, what are you doing? I said, I'm fighting today. What fight? The sixth. Oh, where's your trainer? Where's your seconds? I don't what do I know about that? And they said, we'll be your seconds because we're fighting the earlier fights. There were two flyweights and bantamweights, and so they were my seconds. And I get in the ring the first fight, and for the first minute I got the hell knocked out of me. Then I realized this guy couldn't touch me if I kept my left fist in front of his face. So I beat the guy. I won the fight, and that was it. I boxed all the way through. But it was, I did a lot of things different in the Navy. It was like a big game to me. It was hardly a scary war, you know.
Except for maybe the part where you're in the middle of a depth charge attack and are wondering if the bulkheads are going to get away.
Yeah.
So you sort of have that kind of one moment when there's maybe kind of an uh-oh quality to it.
Here? Yeah.
Now, were you ever up on watch on the surface and get caught by aircraft at that time? I mean,
A couple times you get knocked down. Well, you don't any inkling. Like a couple times you see there'd be an albatross up there. You look at it, flap your wings, you know. But the thing is, they're coming in sailing like, hey, we spotted you as a plane, you know, we dive.
And would you, if the planes were coming, would you be able to figure out whether they were, ours or theirs, or did you just dive first and ask questions later?
They're always theirs.
Mm-hmm.
We lost a couple of submarines in a war because American aircraft sank them.
Mm-hmm.
See, you don't carry a flag.
Yeah.
And a lot of submarines look alike, and so here they come,
Mm-hmm. Just get out of their way.
Charlie Ace wants another star or something. He's coming at you.
So the lighter deck guns, the 20 millimeter, 40 millimeter, those aren't really intended for use as anti-aircraft guns.
No, we would never go combat against plane. My goodness. But even battle surface, submarine was not built for battle surface. It's got to be something. You're standing up there, like I'd be standing on the platform of the 40 millimeter. You know what I'm wearing? Start with, I don't have a helmet on. We didn't have. I got a pair of shorts, a pair of maybe marine boondogglers for boots, and that's no shirt. And I'm up there at battle stations.
Right.
Give me a break.
Not quite the way they do it in the movies. I guess
No,
sometimes you guys don't wear
we
shirts.
didn't have the big shields in front of us and the helmets on, and no, we had nothing. We just were up there in your whatever you're wearing.
Right.
But of course, when you're young, I guess you can handle that kind of stuff,
Now, over the course of the 5 patrols that you made, did they rotate crewmen on and off? Were there veteran guys who
They
go off
do
and new guys who come on?
first. There's the bunch that they want to get rid of. There's always a few reprobates that they just do a few things wrong, and then there's back then in submarines, you make one mistake, you're gone. So, but they replaced about 15% of the crew each patrol. I tried to get off the boat a couple of times. The captain wouldn't let me go. But then again, in my old age, I think back. Our captain was tough. If you weren't an Annapolis graduate, you were kind of low life. But he'd stop at the Yeoman Shack and talk to me once in a while, friendly, which he never did with many of the crew. I don't know about the officers. But then again, a few years ago, I was thinking, why? Then I realized, you got a 19-year-old kid, foot of spunk, do anything, afraid of nothing, and that's your, down deep, that's your right-hand man.
Yeah.
Because all this stuff I used to do was all voluntary, You couldn't get guys to do stuff. He was going to jump on a Japanese boat, with a sawed-off shotgun in his hand.
How many times did you wind up doing that, by the way?
About 7.
All right. And what sort of response ddid you get when you did it? I mean, did people just surprised and? Or,
The people aboard?
Yeah.
Oh yes, yeah. Scared mostly.
Yeah.
They were most of them weren't combatants, weren't even Japs. But it was a strange thing. It was strange for me because you got to remember, I'm a young kid. I'm from the city streets of Detroit. Kid baseball player. Sure, I got in a lot of street fights, but the thing is, there was no war. And the thing is, our first patrol, they start assembling. First, they were assembling a lifeguard crew, and they wanted a swimmer. They couldn't get anyone. People asked, so they saw someone said, "That's Buddy, I'll do it." So the exec asked me. He said, "Come on up, I want to talk to you." We go up to his little quarters in the Ford Battery, and he sits me down. He tells the steward, his mess boy, to bring me a cup of coffee, and then he tells me what he wanted me for, and I knew what I was there for. And I said, "Sure, I'll do it. That's okay." And he says, "If we leave you up, if we got to dive, we might have to leave you up there." I said, "Hey, no problem." He called the steward, take my coffee away. So now the thing about it is, we're going out on the first patrol, the area, and they call me Masinick to the bridge. Geez, Seaman first class. Anyway, I go up to the bridge, And the captain and the diving officer and the exec officer are there. And they told me there was a dogfight between two planes they spotted. One of them got knocked down. They think the planes were Japanese and British. And they think maybe it was a British guy who got knocked down. And what we're going to do, we're going to try and rescue him if he's down. And so I says, permission to go below for a minute. I'll be right back. I went down. I had a Bowie knife a guy at Ford Motor Company made for me out of band steel. I came up with that thing and shoved it in my drawers and, okay, I'm ready, let's go. We never did find the guy though, never did. But I can imagine me going over the side and it being a Jap. You know, what am I gonna do with this guy?
Right.
I gotta have something. But so that was my exposure, my first exposure to war. You know, what am I doing? Last year I was stealing cherries from the next door neighbor's backyard, and here I'm out here fighting Japanese. You know, it's really strange.
All right. Now, once the patrols were over, you get back into the States. How long was it from there before you get discharged?
We got back in September of '45. April of '46, I was home free.
What did you do in between?
Well, we were decommissioning the Icefish. What you have to do, to decommission any Navy ship, you got to bring it up to total complement. In other words, if we was supposed to have 10 electric drills aboard, you had to have 10. If there's only 8, you go and draw 2 more to fill the complement. Anything like that, any complement. In fact, we had stuff that we were supposed to have in our complement we never had during the war. We had to go get it to fill the complement of the boat. Like we're in Hunters Point, speaking of no compliment, we're in Hunters Point. We're going to go up to Portland, Oregon for Navy Day, and the chief of the boat and first lieutenant are out there, and he says, we've got to paint the boat before we go to Portland, and we don't have a spray gun, and there's none available. So what we had to do, we had to put the boat on a list, scrape it, and keep it up there and paint it. When you paint it
with a brush.
brushes.
Yeah.
So I said, whoa. There's got to be an easier way. So I went into the paint locker, they called it. There's a big area, cyclone fence, had a bunch of spray guns and paint in there. And there's an old grizzly chief in there, and I walked up to him. I said, how you do, sir? You know, real friendly. I says, you know what I'd like to do? I'd like to borrow one of those spray guns so we could paint our boat. Get the hell out of here. You submarine sailors are all alike. Y'all never see it again. And, oh, chief, you know, come on, you know, what the heck. You know, what I'm doing, I'm buying time. And he's squaring at me, yelling, and no, I'm looking around, and I'm spotting where the heck his guns are. And over in that other, against that one fence there's a brand new one, nice big 5-gallon jobs. So, we're gonna paint the boat the next morning. They're getting all these paint brushes together, and I told 2 of the seamen, I says, don't go ashore, wait till after dark. And what do you want? I says, you just stick with me. We go over to it's night, I go over to the paint locker, over the fence I go, I grab one of those spray guns, throw it over to these guys, and off we go to the boat. Next morning, they're getting up there, we're having muster every first thing in the morning, you know, you have muster on a boat. And the chief of the boat yelling, hey, you guys, you stick around, we gotta get this thing painted in just a minute. And I walked out with this spray gun. You couldn't believe it. You couldn't believe it. Where'd you get that? Hey, you gotta have connection to this man's Navy. I said, you know, you young kids. We sprayed the boat.
All right. Now, I would And so were you mostly then based up along the West Coast while you were decommissioning, or did you take it back to?
No, we're at Mare Island. We decommissioned at Mare Island. We just stayed there. Once they tied it up, it was there.
And so what did you do the rest of the time? I mean, you're probably not spending all of your time with that process.
That pretty much took it till I left for discharge, and I told them I had a job in Los Angeles, so I could get discharged on the coast, which I did. What I do, I was going on Liberty, and I accumulated a large sum of money. I used to play crap like crazy. Anyway, we'd go on a weekend, and I'd buy clothes. I'd buy civilian clothes. I bought 2 big Samsonite suitcases. I had a suit tailor-made in Hollywood. I'd go into places, like there was a place called Capper and Capper in San Francisco. I went in there and, could I have some white shirts? Well, war effort, there's no white shirts available. Okay, I'll get them somewhere. So I went over and they were looking at the tie pins and cufflinks and a few other things. And I give me one. This is expensive stuff. All at once, the guy says, "Hey, I got a couple shirts here for you. What size you need?" And, anyway, to make a long story, so I bought, and we had a guy who was discharged, and he lived in Oakland, across the bay from Frisco. I used to keep my stuff over there, until I got discharged. And I came over to his house after I left Treasure Island and my discharge papers, had my sea bag, put all my clothes and my sailor stuff in it, and put my civilian clothes on it. And I said, Al, when you get a chance, would you take this down the Express, Railway Express? We used to ship everything back then. Sent it to my mother, She sent this sea bag home. Took me a month to get home. I went from Treasure Island, I went to San Francisco, I went to Dallas, I went to St. Louis, I went to Chicago, then I went up to Manitowoc, and I decided it was a month later I'd go home. But I was civilian, and I had civilian clothes on, and a ruptured duck here, the duck they used to give you to put on your clothes, and it was a pin and finally got home in May.
And once you got home then, did you pick up a particular kind of work or just kick around
I
for a while?
went back, I'll tell you, well, they used to have the 5220 club, Back then, if you were a discharged serviceman, for 52 weeks, they give you $20 a week. Back in 46, I guess that was all right. But then again, I went down and I picked up one $20 check, and I said, no more, I'm not coming down here. I said, I can make $20 a night in the pool room, for crying out loud. Anyway, no more 5220 club for me. I went to work. I went back to my job at Ford's. And then the following spring, I went away to play baseball. I played professional baseball for 5 years. And hurt my arm, and went back and finished school and went to work. Went to one company for 32 years. I worked there, retired.
All right. How high up did you get in the leagues in baseball?
I was in AAA.
And where were you playing?
Toledo.
Okay, so Detroit system then still?
Yes.
Was it Mud Hens were Detroit then?
Yeah, Detroit bought me in 1949. Tigers, and it was fun. It was a fast track for me back then. From going from American Legion baseball in 42 to professional baseball in 47, fighting 3 years of war, being all over the world in 5 years. How much can you take?
Yeah. That's really something.
How much can you take?
All right, well, it makes for a great story, and thanks for taking the time to tell it to me today.
Hey, listen, you reminisce. You think of things that, you hadn't thought about in a long time. And you know what? My wife would hate me to say this, but the 2 main things in my life were my 5 years of baseball and my 3 years in the Navy. 8 years of my life, I'm telling you. It was so outstanding, and something to think about all the time, And it was fun. It was fun all the way. It was fun growing up.
All right. Well, thanks a lot.
All right, we all set?
Yep.
All right. You take care.
That was something.